I've seen it myself. I've seen it when people have gone from like big organizations and they've come into a smaller organization with less resources, and actually they can't roll up their sleeves and get on with it because they didn't know how to do, you know, because you know leadership, it doesn't mean you actually know how to do the job of the people that are working for you. And so I think when you think of game changing talent, somebody who's been game changing within the construct of a large organization with a big brand and lots of people and money and budget,
Yeah.
that far from means that they can do it in all circumstances. So I wonder if somebody who's been able to be game changing with limited resources, is that actually who you should be looking for? Is that more of a signal that that person's going to be able to do it in your environment? Not always, but
not always. I think it's a signal, but it goes back to context, and that's the most important factor for me. And when let's take the example of this kind of fast-growing, scaling organization, that if we move it back to what we discussed right at the beginning of this point, clarity. What does game changing mean? And that, I think, is an organizational question. And it's the factor of holding up a mirror. It's asking difficult questions. And often companies don't want these questions answered because it's actually quite revealing. And if you're the C-suite of that organization and you have a realization that we're asking for game-changing individuals, but regardless of whether we bring this great innovation, our problem isn't innovation. Our problem's, I don't know, operational discipline. Our problem's execution. So actually, in that context, game-changing individuals isn't someone who's going to bring great innovation. It's someone who can professionalize the operations and execute effectively, which doesn't mean you need this superstar studded individual. It actually means you need someone who may fly a little bit beneath the spotlight and execute incredibly well and has great attention to detail. And they're two very different individuals. So I think the premise for this, in my experience, goes back to the organizational responsibility to truly understand, okay, what does game changing mean in our organization, specifically in our organization? And if we tie this to talent, because obviously that's kind of where we all sit, it's really puts talent in quite an awkward situation as a function, because we've talked a lot about talent taking more responsibility for outcome and being accountable, which then moves us kind of further upstream in terms of the decision making. But if your question is just hire exceptional people, and that definition of exceptional is too vague, hiring just becomes subjective again. So what we should be asking is not who we're hiring, but we should be asking, okay, what capability actually changes our trajectory in the context of our organization? So if we think about CEOs, we've always known with CEOs, you want a different CEO for where you are in that organizational life cycle. You have turnaround CEOs, growth CEOs, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't we have that for the teams that actually execute the mission of what the organization is trying to achieve? Yeah. So it's about the conversation that's being had with leadership, which I think is a really important aspect, and asking leadership to be brutally honest, hold a mirror up in front of the organization and truly understand where that organization sits. And I mean, I suppose one of the most interesting aspects that I find is real kind of game changers, real individuals who change the trajectory of the organization often don't look exceptional on paper. And again, it comes to context, because they might come from unexpected industry. They might have unconventional career paths, or might, as we said, might not have been massively in the spotlight because they've just done their job well. And in that situation, what was required was brilliant operational capability. So what we then kind of my thought we need to think of is exceptional people actually bring clarity to the noise that the organization is currently in. So what are they creating? They're not just delivering activity, they're then creating leverage. I mean, does that make sense to you?
It does, absolutely. I love it. It's a really interesting talking point. CEOs need to think about this. Leadership needs to think about this. Talent leaders in particular need to think about this and need to be influencing the organization to consider it more deeply.
I think it's honesty. I think the key aspect here is honesty. Be brutally honest about where your organization is. I think of organizations that I've worked with and helped scale, and what we've talked about in terms of hiring, and the realization that actually, if we hire this so-called absolute star, what we're likely to do is they come into the organization and they either leave the organization relatively quickly because the challenge isn't there, or worse, they become absorbed by the current situation and their light diminishes. And you've actually taken an individual was on a star trust, kind of a great career trajectory, and minimized it. And I think to me, it really comes down to we need to be brutally honest. We need to understand the clarity of what game changing means. If we're not answering that question, we're not hiring for impact. We're hiring for either scaling's sake or comfort. Because if you can look at a hire and go, well, this is why I've hired him because A, B, C, and D, it's fantastic, it's great. But the reality is, comfort doesn't change the game. And often it creates not hostility, but a challenging environment, especially coming into a scaling organization. And those challenging environments, I think, are asked the right questions. And that then comes back to clarity. But you've got to have a leadership team who's prepared to answer some often quite difficult questions.
I couldn't agree more. And on the aspect of clarity, that's why I think it's really important that you've got a blend of hiring leaders into your organization who have come from within, so they've got some institutional knowledge, but also people that are coming from outside, including outside your industry, so that they can come in and they can be really objective. James,
no, I agree more.
It's been great to talk to you. Thank you for your insights. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Indeed, as per usual, look forward to it. Thanks, Adam. Bye-bye.